Welcome to the OverChurched podcast. My name is Justin.
And my name is Delicia.
And this podcast is designated for people who love Christ but struggle with Christians. Yes. And today's special. I'm excited. We have the greatest junior high student director in the world. I had to think. We've given her so many different titles and roles. I didn't want to. Worship leader.
Just all
student director. Student director. So we're like, let me let her hyper focus on one thing.
Yeah.
That's the problem when you have too much talent. Is people try to you just do that and do that. It's your blessing and burden.
Rough being anointed. It's struggling.
The weight is heavy.
I know.
Angelica Redondo.
Hi.
So Hispanic. I love that.
Yeah, I know. I don't even say it like that. I say the white version. Angelica.
It's okay.
Well, we are so excited to have you on this podcast with us, Angelica, and just to get to share your heart. We are super honored. So let's jump into this. The first thing we want to touch base on is, how did youth ministry impact your life? Like, how did that look? Because you got saved at what age?
I got saved probably I think 14. 14 was when I got saved. So I was raised Catholic, actually. And, God bless the Catholic Church, but it was not palatable really for someone who was a teenager trying to understand what a relationship with Christ was. I hate to use this word, but I saw church as something that was boring. It was so traditional to the point that you're standing, sitting, kneeling, standing, sitting. Everyone's reciting the same thing at once. It's little cultish sometimes. I'm like, wait, what's going on? But it's not necessarily bad, and it's no hate towards that church.
Yeah.
But I think for me, when I was 13, 12, I remember I was always the one sitting in the back pew. Ooh, yeah. I was sitting in the back pew and I would always have headphones in, and my mom would be she would be, okay, don't hate.
I don't know how the Pope would feel about that.
But my mom would be singing in the choir every single time. She would make me come early. That way she would be able to do that. And so it wasn't until my best friend, she got invited to a youth group by someone at her school. And then my best friend, she showed me a video of it. I was like, that's church? That looks like a concert. That looks so cool. She just showed me a video of worship. And so then I ended up going. And then that day I ended up giving my life to Christ giving my life to Christ during worship. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's kind of how big of an impact youth ministry has made for me. Because I know that there's a lot of youth directors, a lot of youth pastors out there that are trying their best to reach this generation by making Jesus palatable to them.
Yeah.
And it was almost, it was just refreshing to be able to see a bunch of people who were my age actually love Jesus, actually try to live for him. And then from there, it was just being able to be put in a position where I was able to make friends my age who loves Jesus too.
Yeah.
Even some of the friendships that I made during that time are still friendships that I have today that are my best friends and that lift me up and continue to point me towards Christ. And so I would say that is because of the community that I built there. Because I think too, a lot of people focus on doing and getting students to show up, but they don't actually it's not that's going to get them to stay. It's the relationships that are going to get them to stay, and not just relationships with leaders, but relationships with other students their age. Their peers. Exactly. And so that's kind of what kept me, and that's how big of an impact that it's made on my life. So, yeah.
So much that you started working for a church really young.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
Tell us about that and how being young has affected you in getting so young in ministry, and tell everybody who's listening, what age did you actually come onto staff, and what did that look like for you transitioning into that?
Yeah. So when I was 14, I accepted Jesus, and then I would say 15, 16, 17, it was probably when I was 16, 17. I says I was in the grade above, but I was a year younger. And so I was a junior in high school, probably 16. And that's kind of the age when you're a junior that people are like, what do you want to be? What do you want to do after high school? Because by the time you get to senior year, it's you got to have it figured out. You got to have a plan.
Right.
And I didn't have a plan because honestly, I kind of I wasn't good at anything other than church. That was
Yeah.
pretty much the only thing that I
Not
felt
true.
good at.
You're a theater kid.
I was
Yeah.
a theater kid, yeah, but the only place that I didn't want to go on Broadway, you know,
Okay.
I didn't want to go.
totally see you
I
on
could.
Broadway
I
right
did
now.
not
Then.
I can see you like Into the
Yeah.
Heights, Lin-Manuel.
No,
Sign her up.
oh
Come
my
on.
gosh, no,
With
I
your
would be
voice and
broke.
everything.
I'd be a pigeon lady. Like, what are you talking about? It would
You'd
be
be a
cool.
legit.
I would watch you on Broadway.
I think that was something I always wanted, like, because I knew I had a good voice growing up. Because I went to a performing arts high school, middle school, and I always like knew I could do something like that. I knew I could do American Idol, but I think when I was younger, like I wanted to be famous. I wanted to have like, this is elementary school. I wanted to have like a house with a bowling alley. And, like,
Shout out MTV Cribs.
yeah, I know. I wanted my own.
Did you ever watch MTV
Cribs?
Cribs?
No.
I'm not for that.
It's
You
okay.
didn't have a childhood.
You just
You know
showed your
what?
age.
You didn't have a
Right.
childhood.
No, I didn't have a childhood. I didn't. But yeah, so I like, that's what I wanted. But I think I saw like a photo of like Justin Bieber, someone just trying to go to Walmart, and I was like, I don't want that life. Like, I do not.
Really?
Yeah, and he had like sweats. He looked rough, and I was like, no, I don't. I don't
You're
like
like, that does not look appealing.
That does not look
Just
appealing
for
to
it.
try to go anywhere just to have people following. No, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be known everywhere I went. That seemed rough. And so people were like, go on American Idol. And I was like, no, no, I'm not doing that. So I knew I didn't want to do that. I knew I didn't want to do, but I was going actually, I was going to the church every single day after school, and I was helping out with the kids ministry. And I had gotten some opportunities like speak in the kids ministry, and I like sang in the kids ministry,
Yeah.
but my youth pastor at that time, not at that time when I was like 16, 17, it was probably like when I was 14, 15. I wanted to sing and I wanted to help lead in worship, but we didn't have worship at our youth group because the youth group, there was a point in time where it started to go like downhill a little bit.
Yeah.
I even questioned, I was like, should I still be here? But I felt like I was like, okay, I'll stay. Like me and my friend talked about it. We're like, no, let's just ride it out.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens. So we were saying like, hey, like, I was like, I promise I can sing. Like, I promise I can do it. I know people be saying that and then they're like trash, but I promise like I can actually do it. Give me a microphone and a track and like, I'll lead these students in worship. And they were like, we'll talk about it at our meeting.
Yeah.
And then they would like ghost me. Like they would like never talk to me about it again. So I was doing more kids ministry and like speaking and that stuff at that time. And so by the time I was like 17, I was like, or 16, 17, I was like, I mean, I think like if there's anything that I wanted to do, it'd probably be ministry. I was praying about it. I was like, I feel like this is what I want to do. And this is the only thing that really seems feasible for me right now. That seems realistic. Like if there's anything I could do for the rest of my life, this was what I would want to do. And so I decided, I'm like, I want to do ministry. And then I didn't really know where to go with that. And then the next week I went to youth. The fill-in youth pastor at that time like came up to me and he was like, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I was like, well, actually, like last week, I just decided I wanted to do ministry. He's like, oh, that's cool. We're starting a ministry college, like an internship college, like next year. And I think that it would be great if you decided you wanted to go. Like, we would love to have you be part of that. And so at that point, it was kind of like God like guided me and directed me, being like, okay, if I want to go in ministry, like there's just this perfect opportunity to like learn how to do it.
Yeah.
And so I went through my junior year, and then by the time I was in my senior year, I was like, that's when I was struggling. Like, you made the joke about it's so hard being anointed. No, I made that joke, but I was like, okay, well, I could go into kids ministry.
Yeah.
I could go into like worship ministry because at that point when that fill-in youth pastor came in, that's when I started leading worship for youth.
Yeah.
And that's when people were like, oh, dang, she kind of had a voice. Like, so they scheduled me. They had no idea I could sing, and they scheduled me to lead King of My Heart for in front of the youth group. And that song's kind of hard to sing. Like, it's not, you can't just like, hallelujah. Like, you can't just do that through that. And so I asked them later, I was like, what if I sucked? Like, because like, you guys had never heard me, and they were like, we probably would have just let you suck and like never scheduled you again.
It's teenagers,
yeah, I know. It's rough, you know. Probably would have been the worst moment of my life, but it's fine, you know, trauma.
So
But-
what would you say then, like being a 17, right? Like
Yeah.
17 was really when you came on, made
Yeah.
the decision to actually come on staff as a church. Yeah. Like how did that affect you?
So, I was just really zealous at that point. So I think it just excited me. Then by the time I went through the internship college, it was 2 years. And then in between my first and second year, I got asked to step onto staff for the first time. And
I have a question.
What's that?
Before you go, what made you, which one did you chose worship,
Yeah.
which I told you not to. But it's okay.
Okay. Get over it.
It's all right.
It's
It's all right.
fine.
Still not.
Still not, I mean, I'm not.
It's fine.
It's worked out now.
You know,
Like,
It's fine.
God took you around and now you're doing youth ministry.
Hope you forgive me. It's fine.
No, but what was that? Like, how did you, because I think that's a very hard, especially when you're 17 when you graduate high school? Like,
Yeah, I was 17.
if you have the kids pastor saying, God's calling you to kids ministry, you have the youth pastor saying, hey, forget what they're saying. Like, you need to be doing with students. And then you have the worship pastor telling you, no, this is your call. Like that. I don't know if there's anything more confusing than influential people in your life telling you that you need to be doing what they're doing or you need to be following them. Like, how did you settle on what you decided to do?
That was probably the most stressful season of my life too. One of the most stressful, just because, like at that point, I didn't realize it at the time, but I like idolized my leaders and like their voice almost replaced the voice of God in my life. And so at that point I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, God, what do you want me to do? So I had 2 youth pastors at that point.
That's
One
right.
of them was telling me, it was you. You're like, bro, going to students. Like, it's so good. But the other youth pastor was like leaving. And he was like, hey, on my last day here, I want to talk to you. Like, and I was like, you giving me your job? You giving me your job? Like, hey, it's okay. He wasn't.
I'm not, you're gonna be a leader. Like you're 17.
It's okay, you know? It's okay. You gotta dream big. I was excited, man. And then he was like, no. But he ended up sitting me down and being like, in all of my years of youth ministry, young adults ministry, I've never seen someone more anointed towards worship that I have you at such a young age. And he's like, you should do worship. He's like, I think you should do worship.
Sabotage me behind my back. I didn't even know.
It's fine. It's fine. I just sent him a text later. Forgive him. He'll be forgiven by the extent
I never knew that. I was 2 years old. I never knew that conversation.
So he sat me down, him and his wife, and they told me that. And then I had like a FaceTime call with like the lead pastor at that point, and she was like, you've done kids ministry, because I hate to break it to you, I was not thinking of students at that time. It was between kids and worship. He tried, but it's fine.
4 years later, God worked it out.
God worked it out. But she was like, you know what? You've been going to kids every single day after school. You've already seen the behind the scenes. You already know what that looks like. Try worship, because you don't really know what that looks like. So just try it for like the first semester. And then at that point, if you feel like, I want to go back to kids, then go back to kids. Yeah. So I tried worship for the first semester. And I think that's when I like fell in love with worship. And I was like, okay, so I'm going to do this. And so I ended up choosing worship, and then they pulled me on staff in between my first and second year. And then so I was working part-time for the church, part-time. There ain't no part-time church positions out there.
You were paid part-time, but you were there 50 hours a week.
I was there every single day. Yes. But it was like, so that was my school at that point. And so I was doing school, and then I was like working there, and then my community was there, and then my religion was there. So like everything at that point was like there was no balance at that point. And it was cool. It was really good. I think like I had all these people too being like, man, God, like this is your purpose. Like God has brought you into your purpose. Like this is so good. Like this is your calling, is to be like doing worship and all that. And I was like, okay, cool. And so like me and my little young self started like, okay, all right. Like I'm good. Like I
was feeling yourself coming on, and you're feeling like, I got this. Like, so this was like something that you felt good about. When did it turn for you?
I would say there was, so this is when it started to turn for me. There was an imposter syndrome that I was dealing with on a regular basis because my dad, he struggled with alcoholism growing up. And so as a child, I saw my dad like drunk more than I saw him sober. Wow. And so at that point, I saw that. And then I also saw a broken relationship between my parents. And so I didn't really have an idea of what a healthy relationship looks like. And I also didn't really have an idea of what healthy coping mechanisms looked like, because behind the scenes, I was actually struggling with an addiction.
Wow.
And I was also struggling with like a situationship, like relationship that just shouldn't have been existing. Yeah. And so I'm going on stage and I'm like doing these things and it's like good. And then also I have all of my leaders. They were, I think like they had the right intent in their heart where they were just trying to build me up. But there were more times where I felt like I was being torn down than I was being built up. Like there were less times where it was like, hey, good job. And that was it. It was more of like.
Did you feel like you could be honest, or did you feel like, so some people, like why they've walked away, especially young people, they've walked away from church or whatever. It's like, it's more of like the blame game. It's like, you know, it's easy to get into that of like, well, nobody asked me how I was doing. Nobody, and me and you have talked before. It's like, you knew what to say to make sure that nobody knew what was going on.
Yeah.
So like, was that just like a natural instinct to react that way? Or do you feel like it was the environment that you were in that you really felt like you couldn't be honest because you hadn't seen anybody be honest? Or
I think that I'd seen people get caught. And like I had seen what that looked like and down that route. But I think I didn't feel safe enough to be honest for a couple reasons. Number one, I still at that point idolized my leaders. Like whatever they said determined my worth and my, it determined where I felt like I stood with God. So it's like if like my leader was like, hey, I'm really disappointed in this, and they're like frustrated at me, like, you know, if I accidentally spend too much money on a lunch, you know, something like that. That, like for them, maybe in their brain, it was like, okay, I'm frustrated with you. They don't really know how to show the grace side of it. There was a lot more truth than grace.
Yeah.
But I think at that point, I would go home and I would beat myself up and I would like be so frustrated at myself. I think it had been going on for so long to the point that like Satan kept me stuck in my box of shame.
Wow.
To the point where it's like, okay, well, it was everything at that point. It was my job, but it also was like my school. And then it also was my friendships. And then it also was like every single relationship. And then, it was my whole identity. And then my whole identity had become my church at that point, rather than being a daughter of God and who he was. And I think I just didn't feel safe. And I low-key had trust issues with my leaders just because of the way that I saw them talking about other people behind their backs, or the way that I would say something like, cause I caught on to it, cause I would almost like become like them. And I would start talking to them about other people and like, they wouldn't correct me. There would be no correction in the sense where it's like, hey, like show grace, or like, hey, you're not that good too. Like, you know, you're fine. It was more of like, they would just feed into it sometimes.
They allowed it.
Yeah, exactly. Like
that's what it taught you.
Exactly. Yeah. And I was the youngest person in that room at that point. Yeah. And I think too, there's something when you're the youngest person in the room where you feel like you're the butt of the joke 24/7.
That's so funny that you said that, because I talked to another young leader this week and she said the same thing. She said, I just felt like I was constantly like talked down to, and almost like belittled almost. And she's just like, I know like some people like they don't mean that, but like after some time it just happens so much. So what would you say for somebody listening who's older that doesn't want to do that and they have a young staff, or somebody who is dealing with that, you know?
I would say for somebody who's younger, number one, I would say it's you belong in the room. And I think sometimes you can unintentionally feel like, why am I here? Or nobody likes me. And I just want you to know is that you belong in the room is so many factors had to have happened in order for you to be in that position and you to be in that room. And I would also, just say it's like, don't let it affect your identity and don't let it affect like whether or not you feel like you're called to that position in the moment or like that's your current assignment. Cause that's another thing I hate too. But I'll say it. It's just, I hate it when people like say your one calling in life is one specific thing. Cause when you say that, you're unintentionally for them putting in a box what God actually could be wanting to do in their life.
Yeah.
So
I agree.
yeah. So that's one thing.
Yeah. I think that's,
I mean, you look at your life, like not to be the spoiler alert, but yeah, you started off in kids ministry, did a full internship for worship, ended up working in worship.
Yeah.
And now you the student ministry,
But yeah.
And it's crazy. You've done all three things. Like God didn't box you in. There was just different seasons where he had you focusing on different things.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think now I'm actually trying to learn like how to hone in the gift of like speaking.
Yeah.
Because I abandoned it completely by focusing so much on worship.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would also say to somebody who's older, to finish answering your question, to somebody who's older and constantly talks down to someone who's younger.
Yeah.
You're not going to be around forever.
Yeah.
And that person's going to be the person that replaces you one day. And so you're unintentionally creating a cycle of people tearing down other people because then they're going to feel like, okay, I finally made it. Now I feel like I'm in the position where I can talk down on somebody else. And it's like, no, that will be written in the Lamb's Book of Life, It's like, do not talk down on other people. And also, I would say, who gave you the right to feel like you're superior to that person? It's like God gave you the position that you're in right now, and he trusted you with that person and to be that person's leader, not to tear them down, but to build them up and to be the person that God has called them to be. And that's a really big responsibility. But who are you to determine whether or not that person is really worthy or what tests they have to pass in order to be able to seem deemed like respectable and,
That reminds me of what Jesus said when the disciples were trying to get all the kids away because they were taking up his time. And he was like, no, like bring them to me. Like, I don't. And then I think about what, people say all the time, what Paul told Timothy, don't let anybody despise you because of your youth. But we actually unintentionally do despise young people oftentimes by speaking down to them, belittling them, making them the butt end of the jokes. Because the way you poke fun at a younger person, you wouldn't do that to someone older than you.
Yeah.
But really, it shouldn't be that's messed up. It makes me think, because you were talking about, I was thinking like, because there is this narrative of, not just narrative, it's a reality that a lot of people, younger people, specifically like this COVID generation and those, like they have terrible social skills. Like they're so sheltered, like they get awkward, they get anxious, they don't look people in the eyes, all these things.
Yeah.
And we went to the DR recently and we had this tour guide. What was her name? I can't remember. Let's call her Maria. Just to give her a name, like I'm not going to say Jennifer. She was in the DR. But anyway, Maria was leading this whole group of pastors, like 50 pastors or something like that. And she was just leading us with confidence. Like she was translating, she was teaching us, she was answering all these questions. And eventually we were like, how old are you? She was like 20, right? 19.
Yeah.
I think she was 19.
Yeah, 19.
I don't think she was 20
No,
yet.
she was
19. She was in veterinarian school. And she's like, I think I'm gonna give it up to fully work at Compassion and like just do all these things. We're like, what? And then so my friend asked her, like, where do you get this confidence from? Like, she's just like, she's bossing all of us around, like, and not in a negative way, but just very walking in authority. Yeah. And he was like, where do you get this confidence and this like swag from? And she goes, I'm Dominican. And then
she's like,
she was like, I'm just Dominican. But then she says, and I think my father, my dad is really, but it that moment showed me of like the power of your identity,
Yeah.
like, and also the power of a father or a father figure who speaks life and brings that out of you to where you can walk in any room and like, you're not, I don't care what, I mean, not that she wasn't disrespectful or dishonoring towards any of us, but she wasn't intimidated, which is good, right? Like,
but as you were saying that, I was thinking like, I think all of us were willing to adhere to her authority because we were an unterritory, like it was a unfamiliar territory to us.
Yeah.
So because we didn't, us as being older, didn't feel confident in what we were walking through.
So she brought
us through or whatever. But I think that as a leader, sometimes the older leaders, they don't intentionally, sometimes some of them listening are like, well, I didn't intentionally, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I thought it was a joke. Like, I thought it was like,
That's
you know what I'm saying? And it's like, I could totally understand that as well. I think what we just have to understand, and when I'm learning even in this time, is like that younger people, when they do things that are like, you're just kind of, you laugh at because you're just like, man, I just remember that. Like, but you have to remember it and understand that you didn't become this experience just off the bat. You grew in this experience. And so also allowing them to be a big brother, big sister, big like mom figure, dad figure, whatever the case might be. Like, we need more of those. And so I would just say that for any older leaders that have younger people, it's like just remembering that, like, even though this young, like you said, like you came in zealous. So like somebody would be like, she thinks she knows it all. Like,
hey, you said something though before, I don't want to forget. You said we were unfamiliar, so we were dependent on her. But I think the factor is a lot of life is a lot of leadership is unfamiliar. But I think a lot of leaders, whether pastor, leader, director, whatever, the things that are unfamiliar for them, they feel insecure about. And then, so the way they treat people is really based out of insecurity because they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And what makes it a threat is if some young, beautiful, talented, anointed person comes in with all this zeal.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to steward her or handle her.
Yeah.
My natural inclination can be to belittle, to only point out the flaws, to try to keep her humble.
Yeah.
I hate that phrase. I got to keep you humble. Like, I just think, like she said, I need people that would build me up. Not that she can't correct me, but I think about it in sports. Like, every time I played for a coach where I was scared to mess up, I messed up more.
Yeah.
But when I played for coaches that were like, bro, just ball out.
Yeah.
And I would be doing dumb stuff. They'd be like, come here. That was dumb. Now get back in there. Like, but you play with a different freedom when you know, like, even if I mess up, I'm not going to get sat down. I'm not going to get pulled out the game. Like, you'll like allowing them to play through their mistakes so that they can grow. It breeds this confidence that you're going to need in another season of life.
That's so good.
So
I think too, you also said, you brought up 1 Timothy 4:13. And it's like, do not let anyone look down on you because you're young. But a lot of people, I was just listening to this podcast. I was like, dang, they're right. A lot of people miss the second half of that. It's like, be an example by the way that you live and by the way that you, and I think a lot of young people right now, they, especially in ministry too, we try to play like, and that's what I was doing. We try to like play the game of like, okay, what line can I cross before it's like I lose this or anything like that. And it's a dangerous game where it's like leaders are held to a higher standard. And so God will elevate you to that point, yes, but also it's up to you to decide, are you going to put aside the childish things? Because there's also like a feeling of almost like FOMO, like that you have where it's like, man, I didn't really get to experience my 20s, or I didn't really get to, it's like being 21 and like telling people, I don't want to go to the club, I'm sorry. Like, you know, it's like things like that. Where people almost want to have like those wild experiences sometimes, or it's like just regular 19-year-old struggles that I was dealing with at that time. It's like boy struggles. It's like we're different. Like, I didn't really have like a father who was really telling me what my worth was. You know, I had a father who was just reminiscing on his old times and all of that, and wouldn't listen to me, and would, you know, and then the way that he would treat my mom sometimes is like their relationship, it wasn't the best. And so that was the only example of a relationship that I really had at that point that I looked up to. And so not feeling safe to be like, hey, I'm struggling in this relationship, or hey, I'm struggling with this addiction, because I'm too scared to be sat down. I think too,
you're holding too tight on that position, that role, that identity, essentially, instead of, like you had mentioned, like instead of holding on to just being a daughter.
Yeah,
that was
exactly.
more important.
Yeah.
So what happened? And so eventually crap hit the fan.
Yeah.
You I mean, I don't want to tell your story, but like,
no, it's
so talk me through like I'm not even necessarily saying details, but like, how did it go downhill, and what was that experience like?
So I think it really went downhill the more that relationship went downhill for me, because it put me in like almost mental turmoil sometimes. And there was this big imposter syndrome, and there's only so long that you can do that before you break. Like before it's like, I'm like one person when I'm at this place, and I'm one person when I'm at home, like two completely different things. And so I think I had just started to feel so guilty, like so guilty. And I wanted to open up to my leaders. And then it was kind of whack. So the guy we both wanted to open up. And so he told my coworker at that time. And then that was like the night before everything hit the fan. But then I still like went home feeling so guilty. He prayed with us, and he was like, okay, like we're good. And then prayed with us, and we were like, I can't speak for him. I know me though, it's like, I was not okay. Like I had just almost been hit. You know, like those quiet people you have in your life that don't really say anything, and then they do say something and it just like wrecks you.
Yeah.
So that's my friend Aurora. She like, she is quiet as a mouse, like so kind. And then she said something, and it called me out. Like I was like, dang girl, but it like really wrecked me. Like I don't know. And it was good. Like if you're listening to this, don't worry. Like, cause I know she'll feel bad too, but
I needed it.
It was good. I needed it. And so I ended up calling that same coworker, and then I went to like lunch with him and his wife. And that's when I decided, I was like, okay, I'm going to open up. And cause like 2 weeks prior to, I think my boss was like onto it, cause we had like a meeting, and she was like, you know, if you were ever struggling with an addiction or, you know, a relationship, like, you know, it's like, you could come to me and I'd be with you every single step of the way, you know? And so I think at that point I was like, hey, crap, she's on to me. I don't know if it's some sort of Holy Spirit thing, or if it's like, I don't know what it was. I was like, I don't know.
Something happened.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know. But so that day I ended up telling her. And then that was just when everything kind of went downhill. Because I could see that they valued my gifts so much that they were, first of all, my bosses were just disappointed. They were really disappointed. I ended up going home early that day because it was like towards the end of the day. And then the next morning, that night was rough. It was really rough, because then it's like, not even just kind of figuring out, it's like, okay, am I going to get fired? Or it's more of like, no, you can take like 16 hours, go home, you know, wrestle with it, come back, and then we'll tell you whether or not we're going to fire you, kind of thing. Not necessarily what they said, but it was more like, so that was kind of what happened. I got pulled over on the way home. You know, it was
Dang, you had a bad day.
It was a bad day. To be fair, I was on my phone on the freeway. But,
oh my God.
You know, it was young. Do not let anyone look down on you.
She tried to use the scripture to agree.
That's what I told the police officer. I'm kidding. But so I ended up going, and then basically they were like, the next day they were like, we're not going to fire you. We're not going to fire you, but you're going to be the best admin that worship department's ever seen. And you're going to have to do this and this and this and this and this and this and this if you want to keep your job, pretty much. And it was almost like you're on probation, kind of, without saying you're on probation. And so then I ended up, like, that day, I didn't intentionally see the guy. It was just like, he was just happened to show up, and I was like, okay. And like nothing happened. And then I came back to like CR. I came to work the next day. And then it was just, there was just a lot going on. So at that point, what ended up happening was that day I didn't get fired, but I ended up quitting because I don't know. It was God that definitely told me to quit because I held on. Like you were saying, it was more of like I was holding on with like white knuckles, like gripping for dear life onto this title that had given me purpose and that had given me like a reason to live, almost like a reason to be called by God and to be anointed by God. But so that day I was in the executive one of the executives' office, and she was just yelling at me like I think there's a line between like talking through someone and being like, hey, like that wasn't right, let's talk through this, there's consequences to your actions. But it was like, how dare you, and like all of that stuff, like yelling at me.
After you resigned?
It was right before I had resigned.
Oh, it was like the finals were like, I'm resigning.
Yeah, I felt the Holy Spirit in my brain say, you don't deserve to work here. And what I had thought in my brain, I was like, man, I messed up so bad. I don't deserve any of this. And so then I just said, I quit. And it was that shut her up. Like, it was like, what? And then I ended up quitting, but I still stayed there. Because I heard God say I shouldn't work here. I didn't hear him say that I shouldn't go there. And so I ended up finding out like later more of like I didn't deserve to be yelled at like that kind of thing, and I didn't deserve to be in that environment. But so in that time I was still there. I was just devastated because I thought I had missed my chance. I thought I had missed my shot. But what God ended up doing when I was younger, because I was like 14, and then by the time I'm like next week to the next week, like I had just gotten higher and higher and higher and higher in responsibility and leadership, to the point that I never felt safe to open up about the things that I struggled with. And I never felt like I had the opportunity to go through a sanctification process where God really sanctified me and helped me get ready, because there was something that executive did say that I was like, it really stuck with me in a good way. She had said, like, your talent may be able to take you somewhere, but your character won't be able to keep you there. I think it was her that said it or something like that. Or it was like, by the time your character's right, like you're leading worship, like it'll be on a different level. But it was true though. It's just sometimes as young people, like we'll rely on our talent and we'll rely on our ability, but our character won't be able to keep us in the place that God wants us to be at if we don't actually take the time to really sanctify ourselves and to really to become righteous before God's sight, and to actually like to live for him, because God doesn't care about our works as much as he cares about us.
No, that's so good. Oh yeah.
I know we got to wrap it up. But I wanted to ask this because, okay, so you started off this little young prodigy, all these talents, all these abilities, do ministry, still struggling with some behind the scenes stuff, which I do want to commend you. You never got exposed. You exposed yourself. Like I think that's another thing that's important about this story is like, this wasn't someone getting caught in the act with people throwing stones. This was someone like, hey, this is what I've been struggling with and it's been killing me. And you still ended up feeling like you were getting the stones, but
they had ready.
But here's my question, because knowing your story, you don't come from a faith background in terms of, parents that are united in the same way of where you can like have a pattern to follow. You've seen, we didn't even get into all the details, but just the conversations we've had, like it got way worse after that. Like you've seen things in ministry that most people will never experience and never see. And I think it's important because even this podcast, OverChurched, a lot of the people that are OverChurched, they're de-churched and OverChurched almost because of the fact that they were looking for reasons to leave. Like they were looking for flaws. Like they were never even like working at a church, and like they never had like a senior pastor do something or say something inappropriate to them, or like, you know what I mean? Like they've never experienced crazy things. It was just like, I don't know. No one acknowledged my gift or whatever.
They didn't make room
They
for
didn't make
it.
room, like whatever.
I would say I'm glad you brought that up, because there was this revelation that God gave me in regarding to all of that.
Mhm.
Because I was really fighting the tension of like the bitterness that I was feeling from everything after. Because that's true. Like that wasn't the thing that, like, I knew I was wrong in that situation.
Yeah.
That wasn't exactly what really turned me against like the ministry in general. I was like, dang, like I did not know it was that bad.
Yeah.
But there was something that I felt like God had told me. There's in John, I'm pretty sure it's John. Jesus is praying for unity.
Mhm.
And he said, may they be in perfect
John
unity
13.
to the point that it's a testimony to others. And like, they,
17. John 17.
yeah, yes.
John
Okay.
17.
So in that, yes. So Jesus is talking about unity. And so that's really the heart that God has for his church.
Yeah.
Not one of the churches in the valley,
Yes.
the entire church.
Yeah. for
Like
sure.
every single brother, every single sister.
Yeah.
That's his heart for the church.
Yeah.
Satan has a plan of division for the
Yeah.
church. And so I'm going to say this, it's going to sound blunt, but it hit me hard when I heard it. It's like, which plan are you going to choose to submit to? Is like, are you going to get like, sometimes it's really easy to play the blame game. It's like, they did this, they did that, they did that to me, they did that to me.
Yeah.
But also it says in the Bible that the measure in which you forgive others is the measure in which God will forgive you.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I think this does not downgrade anything that you may have experienced or anything that other people may have seen. Like, I know for a fact that church hurt exists.
Yeah.
And I think that whenever I hear people talk about how it doesn't exist, it's just the people, I'm like, nah, you've never
Like,
seen
no, I've seen a whole organization be crooked.
No.
I've seen the whole system come against me.
It's corrupt.
It's You're like, it was people's. But
overall, I think that you're saying in the sense of, for anybody listening, is like to remembering being young through your story, Angelica. And thank you for sharing just the pieces that you have shared and the vulnerability that you have shared. I think that it's amazing to know that people should know on this podcast who are listening is that you are back on serving on a staff. You are back in the church, and all because, like you said, you chose a side, you chose to have unity and to understand what that unity looks like. And that unity does not mean that you will never be hurt. You'll never be offended or, anything of that nature. But I'm choosing to now, my identity's in my father and I'm his daughter. And that's your focal point. And he's used everything that has happened to you for his good.
everything.
Everything.
Like
And
everything.
I think that's so powerful. So I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Problem.
We're proud of you.
We're proud of you. We love you. And I just want to thank everybody who's listening, that I hope that this encourages you. I hope that this just starts something inside of you to remember just being young in ministry and what that looks like. So,
or even if you're old, because the sad thing is, like, people that are in their 30s, 40s, 50s haven't got that. They're still holding on to bitterness, labels, brokenness, what happened to them. So I think this is a multi-generational lesson of you get to choose. Like you said, you get to choose which plan you submit to.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Have wrong things been happened to you? Have you been broken and beat down? Probably.
Yeah.
But you get to choose unity, which is the heart of Jesus, and you get to rebuild his bride. So thanks for choosing to rebuild his bride at Legacy. We're grateful for you. And you get to make our kids ministry better, our youth ministry better, our worship ministry better.
Yeah.
So proud of you. Well, guys, until next time, go love, live, and lead like Jesus.
See ya. Baby, you got to figure out